All right, welcome to our lunch and talk. I'm Mike McFalls. I'm the interim director of the Bo Bartlett Center, director of Pasquan, and many of you know I'm a professor of art here at Columbus State University. It's such a pleasure to have all of you at this lunch lecture today for Raheleh Filsoofi's Artist Talk. She is the Tennessee Fellow for the Southern Prize. But before we get into that, before I have an opportunity to introduce her, I want to talk a little bit about the Bartlett Center and thank our exhibition sponsors. Again, the Bo Bartlett Center is here at Columbus State University. It's our kind of transdisciplinary center for the arts. In fact, we've been talking about it as the hub of the College of the Arts in many respects. And it actually houses many paintings of our native artist, Bo Bartlett. The other thing is that it's part of the College of the Arts. I also want to thank our exhibition sponsors for the South Arts Southern Prize. South Arts Southern Prize is a prize that consists of 9 of the southern states and the winners from each state. It's a very competitive prize, and like I said before, we have here Raheleh Filsoofi is the Tennessee State Fellow. Our catalog and exhibition sponsors this year are Donna and Carrie Hand. She's one of our exhibition sponsors. Helen and Comer Hobbs is the other exhibition sponsor. And then we have our corporate sponsors, Chubb and Southern First. And finally, I'd like to thank Wim, if he's out there. Wim is our curator for this exhibition, and Andrea is our exhibition catalog designer. So before I introduce, right now I'm going to introduce you to Raheleh Filsoofi. Raheleh is a resident artist, or a resident of Nashville, Tennessee. She was born in Iran and has lived in the U.S. for the U.S. South for more than 17 years. Among her solo exhibitions that she's had some at the Spinello Projects Gallery in Miami, Florida, the Georgia Southern University in Statesboro, Texas University of Houston, and also Abad Gallery in Tehran, Iran. She's had numerous exhibitions at numerous galleries and museums, both nationally and internationally, but a couple of them would be C24 Gallery in New York City, the Brinkley City Center in Miami, the Warehouse at Cornell Art Museum, and the Bailey Contemporary Art Center. Filsoofi holds a BFA from Al-Zahra University in Tehran and an MFA from Florida Atlantic in Boca Raton. It's such a pleasure to see you again, Raheleh. We had such a great time installing your exhibition. And without further ado, here we are, Raheleh Filsoofi.
Thank you so much, Michael, for the introduction. I'm going to share my screen and then I start. Okay, can you see my presentation?
Yes.
Yes. Well, thank you everyone for joining me during your lunchtime. I'm humble and grateful to be here, but also I'm honored to be selected as one of the artists from Tennessee, selected by South Art. It's an honor. And also I really want to thank you, Michael, for making the whole exhibition happen and help me through this process of installation. Also Wim for selecting my work, and also Joshua Newben for making this happen. And I'm extremely grateful for this opportunity because South Art highlighted my work, and this opened so many opportunities to be more active and more committed to contribute to the art scene of southern region. So thank you for joining me. It's very hard to talk about multimedia installation. It's because of the complexity of the work. But before I talk about my work, I really want to give you a little bit of background of where I come from, who I am, and why I'm making what I'm making. So Richard Fry, the American scholar of Iranian studies at Harvard, once said, "Everyone in Iran is a poet." And that's sort of true because of the love and passion of Iranians for poetry, and I'm one of them. And if you ask me from the poet side of me, where I come from, I would tell you that I was born in Iran, somewhere between the softness of Persian silk rug and the unity of intense colors and intricate patterns of ceramic tiles. But the reality within this very poetic space was very different. The story of my childhood is an account of a country, growing up in a country that was torn into different ways. Initially, there was the revolution, an internal struggle that tore apart the country that was itself in the midst of modernization. And then there was 8-year war with Iraq. So I grew up in an environment that sound played an important role as correspondence. The very first form of art that I sound or art that I experienced was the sound of prayer from nearby mosque, Persian music and poetry, yet they were mixed with the sound of marching, scream, the slogans, helicopters, warning, sirens and bombing. So therefore I might be able to say that back then life became a particle of now, only to be lived and experienced by hour or by day, and just this space in between. So we were trying to survive in a very confined spaces. We were trapped in houses, trapped in shelters, trapped in a country with no exit door. So as a 4-year-old embraced in my father's arm, as I marked and read in this photo, I had the very first-hand experience witnessing the victory of new regime, a memory that is still vivid, that I can almost taste the dust of that under construction building and the overexcited clamor of the crowd. As an Iranian citizen, especially as a woman who was bounded by law enforcement to the male authority, for permission in every single step of my life, I decided to leave Iran behind and seek my fortune in the land of opportunities, unaware what future had up her sleeves. Due to my complicated status in the United States for many years, I didn't have the luxury of living a free or unrestricted life, and freedom of movement, settlement, and choice became the biggest issue of my life and later in my art. One might think that this is all in the past since I'm a citizen now, but these primeval restrictions are not history for me. You know, in the wake of the administration's Muslim ban, the former administration's Muslim ban and its aftermath, I'm reliving the past all over again through my fellow Iranian and friends and my fellow Middle Easterners in general. Every day has become a relapsing, horrified reality by the labors and hardship of all the victims of Syrian war, all separated families of Mexico, and all the outcasts of Afghanistan. And if you know that the number of immigrants detained by ICE has increased even now 70% under Biden administrations, so things has not got better. So all these traumatic incidents gravely influenced my artistic viewpoint and launched a new chapter in my career as a social practice artist. Up to this point, my art pretty much was exploring my artistic heritage, ravishing tiles, Islamic patterns, ceramic, work, and so on. But as the wind of change blew my country away by the events of green movements, residing in the United States and not having access to the ongoings in Iran, I was also blown away by this picture and its message it is spread around the globe. That Iran is alive and Iranian women are ready to fight for freedom more than ever. So this girl, this young goddess of Odysseian peace, stimulated my curiosity to dig more about Iranian women and their roles in Iran's contemporary social and political reforms. So I felt at that time, I felt really outcast, as an outcast and exasperate of who knows nothing about my own my own country's current changes. And I felt very oblivious of the role of women and the degree of freedom that they had retained since my departure. So therefore, I decided to visit Iran, and this time not as a tourist and not as a fellow Iranian, but as an artist aspiring to learn and explore. So I visited the northern part of Iran, famous for their pottery, and particularly this area, these regions are famous for pottery by women who were very key figures in their villages. For a couple of months, I learned how these women live, how they love, how they think, and how they make pottery out of all these daily routines. And what stunned me the most was that out of their simplistic, abstract mannerism, inspiration and beauty outburst glow. I really want you to get to know them because of their impact in my career.
الان گرفتن چی بود؟ روغن بود.
من سارای محمدی هستم. یه من بده.
So their handicrafts might not look appealing to the trained eye of Western ceramic artists, but the pristine craftsmanship and purity of presentations is what set them above the average. Something that hugely influenced my installations later on. The light, the material, the demonstrations in the storage room, the guilelessness and their honesty. After I got back to the United States, I felt obligated to become more responsive to what happens in the world and to create work that is more meaningful to me and those around me. And this inspiration comes from these women because they were making a simple work, but had such a huge impact on their own community and their small villages. This is something that it really hugely inspired me. And since then, I try to utilize different aesthetic strategies by incorporating and experimenting with materials with wide ranges of applications for my subject matter. Multimedia provides multi-layers of meanings and perceptions, while each medium plays its own separate role in expression. So my very first multimedia installation started with this idea, which I want to share with you. So this was called Only Sound Remains. And through this work, I'm approaching the exploration of memory and the space within the context of soundscape. So the ultimate goal of this project was to develop an understanding of the very notion of how individuals hear the past and experience acoustic memories emotionally, physically, and spiritually. So I made the series of vessels inspired by the tradition of my ancestors. So these vessels were placed inside a space that is enclosed by a wall, and a small number of people can enter the space at a time to experience the vessels and sounds that emanate from them. So while other people are outside watching the images of women speaking on the screen. So these women narrate kind of stories we tell one another, while the vessels hold the sounds that we keep to ourselves in a place where memories are processed, packaged, and stored. Every medium is used for a specific reason in this installation, and each one engages the viewer in a different ways. So these are the women that I recorded when I traveled to Iran. So there were 30 women who shared their stories, and their voices were coming through one of these vessels. So the audience were supposed to look for their voices and hear them through those vessels. In this installation, the space is configured in two different realms: the interior space of the vessels and the space itself. So the lidded vessels have architectural functions and forms similar to Islamic domes. Their purpose is not to seal the vessel, but to provide a ceiling for the sound. Like the dome of Islamic mosques, which carry sounds throughout the building, these lids offer a similar kind of dimensional depth to the sound, just as the dome covers the interior of the mosque. So the vessels in this installation do not function as ceramic objects, but their functionality is also defined by the sounds within them. So the vessels pay homage to each and every inner sound. The larger space is inspired by pre-Islamic architecture, where a person never enters a space directly. This space is a sacred place that must not be exposed directly to the outside. And as you see, I try to walk the audience also through the history of my country and where I grew up. The poetry and the video prepare the viewer of the experience for the experience inside. It's kind of a transitory kind of experience that help to remove the viewer from whatever experience their outside of world was prior to entering this space. So the main space is arranged to engage the viewer physically through oral and tactile experience in order to have an impact on the viewer, even when they leave the space and they're no longer in the presence of the physical work itself. So after this, this was my very first experience working with sound, and I became interested to understand more about how sound work. And I felt like I brought this into my work without really realizing how it works, it functions. So I went back to Iran and I started recording. That's where my collecting of the sound started coming to the picture, and then you see it in my other work as well. So I started a series of projects under one big project, which is called Oral Topography, which is a development of an understanding of a place in terms of sound. And I explore oral topography, and this is an ongoing project, by walking. I feel this is the physical connection with the place, the kind of, like a foot to the ground connection that connects me to the space, which is not going to happen when you are in a car. Then I really feel this space with more depth. So I seek to understand how the fabric of sound clothes the spirit of a place, and how both sound and ground bring joy to the freedom of movement. This is right after I became a citizen, and I had sort of privilege. I found a privilege and freedom to be able to move and navigate within so many spaces that were forbidden for me. So walking the longest street of Middle East was one of the projects of under oral topography. And this is where I walked this street, Valias, which, as you see in 4 images, 1940 was one of the oldest images I could find from this street. And 1975 is when I was born, the year that I was born, and also 2018, the last time I walked this street. So these are the images of this street, and you see the progress and changes within this street. So in 2015, for the first time, I walked this street from one to the other end, recording these sounds in order to capture the complexities and contradictions of many things that goes inside a city. Old and new come together in ways that are repetitive and yet new each time. It is the fabric of sound that clothes the spirit of the city, and I attempt to explore each thread and the weave that binds them at the same time. So the walk itself was also the symbol of remembrance and stability. These are the places that I was born and grew up, and I lived for a long time. So so these are the main squares located in this longest street. So I stopped, recorded sound, and walked around, and also took pictures and video. So this walk basically became a symbolic gesture and performative act with an aesthetic creativity, which spontaneously and legally celebrates the appropriation of public space to make a greater statement on peace and stability, which we strive in Middle East and also in the world. This street became a symbol, and the walk became the medium. And it's interesting because this street ends the last stop of it is where it ends to Tehran railway station, and it's very metaphoric because when you arrive, you can get a ticket and go to any other places in Iran. And also I became friend with the taxi driver that they drive this route, and they always offer me tea, and they're wondering why I'm doing this when I can get a taxi and navigate through that space. So while I was exploring sound and still figuring out the relationship between sound and soil and clay, I was enjoying, my freedom of movement as a newly citizen woman who finally gained her permission to travel between spaces and collecting and capturing the sound and storing them in my vessel to create an immersive experience. 2018. Something happened, and that was the policy of Trump administrative that on Muslim ban, which opened so many concern and further anxiety for so many people, including myself. And in the wake of these imposed travel restrictions, I personally started confronting the paradox of inhabited and inhabited spaces. And suddenly I felt, what happens if these spaces suddenly become denied, not on me, on so many other people? What impact does this denial can have on one's sense of identity, or someone sense of kind of place in the world? So, and I try to question, what's the difference between be born as a citizen and also as a naturalized citizen? What is the difference, and what kind of freedom they all have in relation to a space? So these are something that I started questioning, and by raising these questions and concern, and by focusing on my own memories and perception of these places that I started moving or passing through, I built a form of inner mind from ceramic vessels, wires, and sound, and I try to invite the viewers also to come to this environment of sound and listen from the music of stringed instruments from New Orleans to the symphonic backgrounds of bird sounds from so many places that I started collecting. And wires in this work leads from one vessel to another in the same way that our thoughts and our impressions pass from one to another in a stream of consciousness that is actually similar to rhizomatic structure of plants. So the nexus of experience that this installation represents, if you have listened, and I will show you the video, it gets disrupted by technology and by the rhetoric of selective travel ban, which results in anxiety, psychological displacement, and inner inhabitation that outweigh any sense of overt privilege. And those who listen to this for a long time can relate to this feeling of anxiety as they listen to this over and over again. I will show you the video of this. It's very short, but I just want to say that the sounds were in this exhibition, because this is installed in Bob Bartlett Art Center, are selected from around 2000, actually, 2000 sounds that were collection from different places that I traveled during the past 2 years.
Until our country's representatives can figure out what the hell is going on.
So from collecting sound, I ended up collecting soil, and it's become a very interesting experience, because I got fascinated to capture the essence of the place beyond its ephemerality, because sound is ephemeral, right? But what makes a place more permanent? So my attention from around and above me shifted to what was beneath. So the soil became the secret of a place that was ready to be unearthed. So I came to discover a place in terms of its past and present through the solidity of its clay and ephemerality of the sound. And so I started collecting soil in addition to collecting sound as I started navigating through these spaces. And the collection of the soil started from 2016, when I was the artist in residence at Chautauqua Institute of Arts, and later the process even transformed the way that I work and create my own work. And it opens so many doors and possibilities for so many new artwork that I show a few of them here. So so the most interesting thing that was a time that I lived between in South Texas, close to the border of Mexico. And I tried to process this clay from this region, also in addition to other regions too. So far, I've collected soil from over 35 locations in Texas, and mostly from Rio Grande Valley region, which includes the border town of McAllen, Brownsville, Progreso, and Roma. And I must give credit to my former students and now my current friends, that they've been helping, they've been so helpful with the collection and the process of the soil during that time. And also, even though I left the region, it's a year now, but still they send me the soil when they travel within that region, so which I'm very grateful, and I always want to give them credit for this participation. So, so in 2019, and I was doing like years of processing this clay. I was in Chautauqua, which is in the west of state of New York. And as I was doing this process, I created a series of ceramic vessels from this clay and in the course of a few months. And the creation of this work was coincided with the event of Trump's response to the 4 women of color in Congress. He said to them, go back to your country. And it raised question of who gives the permission and the right to want to stay and to live. So this question became relevant to me since I was using natural resources of a land that didn't belong to me. And it was taken also the region taken from Seneca Nation a century ago. So that happened when I was doing my I was visiting artists actually in Chautauqua at that time. So this series of work, which is called Halal, and some of you might know this sign as if you go to Middle Eastern store or grocery store or restaurant, they give a reference to food that is permitted and is being prepared in an Islamic way. But also halal to me is about alignment of what is sacred or permitted, kind of halal means in Islamic thoughts with relation to American indigenous peoples' sacredness of land. So this plate halal demonstrates how work transmit and racism, promoting cultural stereotypes and limiting who can have a seat on a table. So this work challenges those stereotypes and assumptions about the land, ownership, and citizenship. So using clay from various locations and various environments is a tactile approach to understand the identity and visual culture of a place. I investigate the relationship of soil and clay to ecology and the diverse collective stories of indigenous people and an immigrant awareness of natural resources. As an immigrant, I want to be respectful for these resources that are now available to me. So understanding a locale and its history while navigating and assessing my own place as a traveler, as an immigrant, which within such an environment. So moving to Nashville last year, because I've got a position at Vanderbilt University, it's just, I started continuing this, right? I'm fascinated by every places that opens up to me. And it's my new home. So I started exploring the new possibilities with soil and sound. So currently I'm investigating the various clay bodies in Tennessee. I'm really trying to understand the social, geographical, and political structure that has shaped human relationship in such environment. And I must say that Nashville specifically has been so generous with different type of clay body texture and colors. And I'm extremely enjoying this process right now. So this is one of the new work. And as you're watching the video, I'm going to explain about this. Can you hear me? Yes. So this project called Bite, and it's a practice of resilience and resistance. Through this project, I aim to reimagine and transcend the colonial narrative present in clay particles of the earth and artifacts throughout the history. As I said, I'm an artist, a woman, an immigrant. So I feel like I'm a witness, an agent to expose the urgency of the contemporary moments. So here I offer my body as a tool and its ability to embed its unique identifying mark on clay artifacts for the future narrative and interpretation. A new narrative that emerges in respect to the past knowledge to value the act of making patterns of my own existence, of my strengths, in the current political landscape. So both labor and ritual, when I say labor, it's because it's a very labor intensive process to make my own clay and make my own object from it. And ritual, the way that I do through the process of biting, the physicality of the action provoke attention to the internal. It's a very visceral experience. I really feel clay with my entire body. Form, pattern, and function captures as I sink my teeth into clay, and artifact from when my body and spirit were borderless. So it's a kind of act of defiance and affirmation for me. So to leave my mark of my existence for the future narrative, I had to change the narrative, and therefore I had to become the narrative. So this is the new body of work that I'm creating among some other ongoing projects. But since two of my projects are currently installed in the exhibition at Bartlett Center, I thought that for those that have seen it, might be interesting to elaborate on that. So I'm going to end my presentation by talking about these two projects that are currently on display. So a symmetrical despondency, I hope you got a chance to see it. As you see, there are two videos and two vessels, lip singing silent stories and jar muffling sounds in an asymmetrical environment, and through kind of telling like sort of a story through poetry. In this work, I portray the labors of female individuals passing through the rampage by telling the stories in a very unconventional way. A poem I'm reciting in two languages, one in Farsi, one in English, with two jars enclosing the tale. Only if the lids are removed, you would be able to listen to this clearly. So in this project, I'm kind of questioning, would language change the essence, the sensation of the anecdote? Or would it overcome, impose the geographical boundaries or barriers which alienate nations? So this work addresses and deals with the refugee, the trauma, and what they suffered because of political or religious oppression, war, migration, and resettlement. It is difficult to even define all the types of events that they have suffered, because refugee trauma often precedes the primary conflict of war-related events that causes them to flee.
Rotten words in mouth. کلمات در دهان پوسیدند. In eyes. تصاویر در چشمان بوی تعفن می‌دهند. Second word. کلمه اول زن. Word کلمه دوم آواره. Vagrant. کلمه بعد از کلمه. Migrant. آواره. Vagrant woman. مهاجر. A rock clinging on her shoulders. زنی آواره با فرش بردوش سرگردان بین دود و land در جستجوی تکی زمین برای کاشت گلهای قالیش می‌گردد. First word mother. Second کلمه اول مادر. کلمه دوم مهاجر. کلمه بعد از کلمه mother. مادر. Migrant. مادر. مهاجر. Migrant mother in the southernmost boundaries of fear and fury. در جنوبی ترین مرزهای ترس و captivity and loss. در بحت حبس و دلتنگی صدای کودکش را تخیل می کند. My own story of vagrancy. داستان آوارگی من اگرچه خواسته. Your own story of vagrancy. داستان آوارگی تو arbitrary چه خواسته چه ناخواسته. داستان آوارگی vagrancy. داستان خانه‌ای story of a house نیست. that no longer exists. خانه‌ای که از آن دیگری است. a house that another grips. کلمه بعد از کلمه. word بعد از کلمه. afterward بعد از کلمه. afterward زن. after مادر. مهاجر. woman. آواره. mother. migrant. vagrant.
And here, I want to end my presentation with more positive note on an ongoing project, Imagine Boundaries, that has been happening since 2017 and currently in development of the third episode. It has 2 episodes already. This work attempts to put a lens on boundaries that exist at all levels, locally, nationally, and globally, in each of, among all of us cultures, countries. But through these 3 episodes, as the artist and immigrant, I question the myriad of like divisions that exist between us. And I'm hopeful to be able to overcome this eventually. The first Imagine Boundary episode focused on the relationship between Iran and the United States. The 2 parallel shows, one in Iran and one in United States, opened simultaneously in coordinated effort to build a cultural communication through art. As you see, the left is in Iran, the right is in United States. In one day, we managed to be able to bring people together virtually. And Iranians were looking at Americans and Americans were looking at Iranians. And then at the same time, they were looking at each other, looking at the work. So it was very complex in some sense. So the second episode, which is currently installed, part of it installed in as part of the South Art exhibition, it's called Alert Miscommunication. So this work was in response to the political and societal events which I felt so profoundly on a daily basis. At that time, I worked and lived 25 minutes away from the border of Mexico. And my focus for this project narrowed to the division that in my new country and home in the United States. Part of this has been kind of exhibited right now, and I hope you got a chance to see it. But currently, I'm working on the 3rd episode, which is called Imagine Boundaries, The Border is Here. Focuses on Nashville, my city. This 3rd episode captures the rich diversity in Nashville, which includes large Middle Eastern and Latinx communities. Nevertheless, there are deep cultural, social, and religious and racial divides which threaten the area's potentiality. As a newcomer to this place, I'm hoping to be able to open a space for people to be able to interact. So this project challenges viewers to set aside the perception about others, recognize the basic humanity in all of us, and summon the courage to move beyond awareness of engagement. So the visual and inspiration for this installation comes from the music room in Ali Qapu Palace in Isfahan. But the elegance of the installation is to make homage to the spirit of interfaith and intercultural dialogue that was promoted, initiated by Safa Khane community in Isfahan in 1902. Safa Khane was first built by Haj Agha Nurullah, where it brought Muslims and Christians together to have a dialogue together, and also find commonality within their practices. And that became the very first interfaith centers in the world. And through this project, I'm just thinking, if we could achieve such a dialogue in 1902, why we cannot achieve it today? So by saying that, I'm going to wrap it up by saying my process from navigation and collection to creation and production is remarkable means by which I exercise my human creativity. Though each process contrasts, but what each offer me personally and on my own betweenness create a great possibilities for the articulation of my conceptual exploration. Every day I continue to explore, and I'm moved by all the experiences and all the inspirations and production. Thank you very much for listening. I'm excited to talk to you and answer any possible question, but in advance, grateful for you all to be here.
So let me spotlight myself here. Hold on. All right, so we are here. We can take questions. It looks like a few are coming in. A few people are saying some comments. I'll let Josh handle the questions, but I have one question really related to my expanded media class, where I think a few of those students are here today. You talked about multimedia, multi-perceptions, and by the way, if you hear that guitar, they started playing again. So sorry about that. I have a metalhead below me in here, but so you talked about multimedia, multi-perceptions, and there's something interesting, and you reflect on this in this talk, but this idea of social practice, politics, and craft. And when you put these things together, I noticed that there seems to be a miscommunication, or there's always this inability to understand the translations that are going on, right? And you only pick up parts of it. And then when you do that, it enables your viewer to make their own interpretation. And I guess the reason I asked this discussion, we have a politics really assignment right now where students have to deal with politics, and we're talking about ideas of propaganda and ideas of leaving it open enough for interpretation. And so I'm wondering if you could talk about how you make those decisions, because you're always in this in-between space, it seems like.
Right, absolutely. Honestly, I feel like I'm looking at my life, the past over 40 years, and even though if I just make a decision to stay away from politics never stay, away from me. So it's kind of this relationship, being a woman, growing up in Iran, and then coming to this country, first become illegal immigrants, waiting 5-6 years to go through the process, living with fear of being deported any minute, right? And then get my permission to stay, go through another process. Is always part of like all these rules and regulations in all these countries affected my life personally. But not only me, but people around me, as I lived with so many people from Middle East that they went through the same stories. And then living in South Texas, close to the border, and hearing and being in direct connection and communication with my students, my neighbors in that region, and how they went through these experiences. And now coming to Nashville, which has one of the largest Middle Eastern community in United States, and see the diversity within this place and what means to live in these spaces is always part of my, life. It's part of my landscape, these stories, these experiences. So I feel like somehow obligated to address that. And even though I try to kind of move forward, still something happens. And I said the new experience of seeing the migration that's happening in South Texas right now. All these are continuously, people moving because of war, because of environmental crisis, for so many reasons. And this is part of our human experience. And unfortunately, it's kind of being kind of intertwined with politics, whether we want it or not. So I feel like obligated. I don't know if I'm answering your question. It's just, it became inevitable for me the past few years not to address this, not to touch this subject somehow. So I hope I answered your question. But it's important to be aware of what's happening around us socially and politically, as intellectual, as human. Because our response are important and can have impact, or at least can open a space for people to think deeper.
Well, you did kind of answer the question, and it's the question I think a lot of my students are asking, and that is it's how far do you go with your work? Do you make it didactic? Do you make it propaganda? Especially when you're dealing with issues of politics today, and or do you leave it open enough that it begins to have a comfortable conversation with the viewer, and let them ask those intellectual questions, as you call them, and I think your work does that really nicely. At times, it leaves us with more questions than we came with, and makes us. I mean, it questions my, a lot of the works question your own humanity and things like that. And so I think that's the discussion. But then there are other artists that feel like you should be much more direct and didactic. So, but I do think that's the question these students are dealing with right now during these times.
And it's important as an artist what kind of form you're choosing to communicate your ideas. And still, I feel like I'm an artist, and some visual aspects of my work, I want it to be also pleasing and inviting. I want the space to be inviting and pleasant. And I feel like actually I can be even more, give more aesthetic attention to my work, and I purposely stop at some point. I don't want sometimes, if you notice some of the colors, like I don't glaze my vessels anymore because the glaze had such an impact, visual impact, that would really distract the viewer from listening to the work, when to me, the sound was supposed to take over. So these are some of the aesthetic decisions I make, but you need to know what form serving your concept. And they need to work together shoulder by shoulder. So making decisions as I'm making my work is, I question that a lot. I start by making a small maquette. Before I actually make my large installation, study each medium by itself and then in relation to each other. But I want that space to be pleasant for the viewer and be safe for the viewer, to be able to think and respond. And it's so open for interpretation. One of the things that I love about talking to people, sometimes they say something about my work that I never intended. And I'm like, oh, wow, I'm going to include that in my statement or when I talk about it, because it just makes more sense. And when work is outside, then it's not mine anymore. Like these three works are sitting in the center right now, and everybody look at it, and I'm not there to even explain it. And I'm just excited to see what people take away from the work too. So it's open for interpretation, and I'm hoping the forms serve the purpose without being a propaganda. I try to stay away from it because I don't want to go to the route that governments take in order to, promote something. So I try to be subtle, hopefully be more poetic, but also straightforward.
Are there any other questions? We've had a lot of comments of thank you, amazing, and things like that, but are there any other questions out there? Give people a minute. There's always that delay in Zoom. Well, it doesn't look like we have. Oh, Yitro is here.
Oh, okay, sorry. Hi. Thank you for sharing your work. I really enjoyed your progress over the years, and I just had a question. So in my class, when I teach ceramics, we talk about the difference between clay and ceramics, and the way I explain is this idea that clay is natural and ceramics through the firing becomes cultural artifact. And I was wondering if you have anything that you could add to that idea, and how do you think about clay and ceramics within your work? I mean, in your lecture, you've discussed quite a bit, but if you have anything to add, I was just kind of curious.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That's such a complex thing. It's very challenging even for the ceramic artist. But for me, clay, when I say clay, I'm not going to give you kind of a scientific, answer, but I want to say that how clay to me it's a medium itself, with its history, with its character. It's more kind of when you talk about materiality, but also you're talking about this material in depth sense of how far it goes, its impact on humanity. To me, ceramics is overall like a general term that can include techniques or other things, right? It can bring the science and history and everything underneath of that kind of category. But clay to me, it's a sense that when I use it, it's all about the material itself, and it's any stages of stages that go throughout its lifetime, from its small particle in the soil to when it becomes an artifact, and this journey that it goes. So for me, clay, when I say clay, is just something that I feel like such a sacred word when I use it, and it's so deep and meaningful. And ceramic, to me, when I use it, is more it also includes a technique. You know, it's kind of more I don't know, maybe more sense of professional use in our field. It's more general. You know, with clay, it's more specific. I hope I answered your question, but as you know, this is a difficult question and kind of hard to answer.
I understand. So
yes.
Thank you. I also had another question. Just looking at what you've made in the past. So there's a piece with a sound, and there's a piece with clay collection, and kind of a natural progression for me. I'm thinking about like other five senses. So have you thought about including smell or taste as you work in this progression? Have you thought about those ideas?
Yes.
In the future?
Yes, thank you so much for this question. And I thought about it a lot from the very first day that I taught about multimedia installation. And that goes back also the question that Michael had in regard of what like form, like what you use, you know, in your, and I thought about putting included spices from my country that evoke memories as well. But at some point I decided not to do that. I really want this to be an oral and tactile experience. And I think there's so much into this interaction that I thought it's too much. At some point as an artist, you need to know how far you're going to use your material. Especially, as I said, I really want to have an immersive experience for the viewer, but I don't want to overwhelm them in a sense that there is a conflict between all these, senses. So I feel like oral and tactile, they marry beautifully and they serve each other beautifully. You know, as people get close, touch the vessel, and also they listen. So there was like a kind of a beautiful, elegant things into this. And so that's why I started staying away from smell. So I thought about it, and but I felt it's also overpowering and takes the sweetness of the experience away from it.
One comment that I had was with your installation, you said you decided not to glaze them because it was too much. And I also thought of a sound as glazing material. Do you know what I mean? It was kind of a poetic gesture, how the sound coats the foam, and it sort of acted like almost like a glaze, right? So I thought it was very poetic and an interesting approach. So thank you for talking about that idea.
Thank you so much. And I'm glad you brought this up because it's a very difficult decision for ceramic artists to away from the surface. But I was just thinking, first of all, there was a little bit impact on the sound with the glazes. The resonance of the sound within a vessel, unglazed vessel, and based on their shape was a little bit different. And I studied all of this. I mean, the sound were coming through different shapes, and we were kind of listening and seeing which one works better. But yes, it was a difficult decision to take the glaze. But one of the reasons I took it, the first reason, it wasn't because of the impact on the sound. It was because I made, before the large installation, I created a small installation with one vessel with a turquoise, like a beautiful turquoise on the vessel. And the sound were coming. And I invited some of my friends to see it so I could observe how people coming in, you know, like in my small maquette. And everybody was drawn to the glaze that nobody could hear the sound. And I was excited that I brought sound from the vessel and nobody can hear it. The glaze was so overpowering, especially that blue. I spent 120 tests of that specific turquoise until I got it. And then that was a decision to remove the glaze because I felt like it's disabling people from listening. So and I was reading a book that time, chromophobia, and the artist was saying that how colors are impactful and how a white serene area stimulates our oral experience to be able to be more receptive. That's why everything, like I removed all the colors and made it simple. Yes, thank you for bringing that up. I appreciate it.
Yes, thank you.
Well, I think that wraps it up because classes start at 1 o'clock and it's 12:59 right now. So I'm sure most of these people need to go. But Raheleh, really thank you. We are so pleased to have you here, and what a wonderful talk and beautiful work. And we look forward to seeing you tomorrow night. Those of you that don't know, the South Arts reception is tomorrow night. The public reception opens up at 6:15, I think, tomorrow. So please join us, and you can talk to Raheleh personally right there at the Bo Bartlett Center. So thank you again, and if you have any other questions for us, feel free to drop us a chat, and we will be posting this on our site at the Bo Bartlett Center.
Thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Everyone for coming. And just a quick caveat, it starts at 6:30. So please come at 6:30. But yeah, please come see the work at any time we're open as well. We'll have the sound on and ready for you. So come enjoy, take photos, be here for it. Thank you all so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you all. See you tomorrow. Bye.